In the world of Hollywood, some faces are unforgettable, scarred, intense, and instantly recognizable. Danny Trejo became the man audiences knew as the ultimate bad guy. From Machete to Heat to From Dusk Till Dawn, he was the villain everyone feared, the outlaw everyone expected to die by the final act. But what most people don't realize is that Trejo didn't need to act. He had lived it. Every scar, every glare, every ounce of menace he projected on screen came from a life carved out of chaos. Long before Hollywood, Danny Trejo was already the villain in his own story. Born in born in Echo Park, Los Angeles, Trejo grew up in a world steeped in poverty, violence, and addiction. His childhood was not marked by safety or innocence, but by survival. His father was strict and often violent, ruling the household with fear. Outside, the streets were filled with gangs, drugs, and temptations. For a young boy, role models were scarce, and Danny looked up to the wrong people, uncles and cousins who carried knives, drank hard, and lived fast. To a child hungry for belonging, their power looked like freedom. By the age of 12, Trejo's life took its darkest turn. While most children were still riding bikes or playing ball, Danny tried heroin for the first time. That single moment changed everything. The drug didn't just numb his pain, it gave him a dangerous sense of invincibility. For a boy who felt powerless, heroin whispered lies. You're untouchable, you're strong, nothing can hurt you. But it was a trap. The needle became his prison long before the steel bars would. As Danny slipped further into addiction, crime followed. By his teenage years, he was committing armed robberies, getting into violent fights, and learning the codes of gang life. Police cars and handcuffs became familiar. Juvenile detention centers turned into second homes. He was no longer just a troubled kid. He was becoming the criminal society expected him to be. Each arrest pushed him deeper into the cycle. Each sentence stole another piece of his youth. Yet, even in those early years, there was a strange duality within him. Trejo discovered he had a natural gift for boxing. In juvenile halls and makeshift prison rings, he proved himself with lightning-fast hands and a fighter's heart. For brief moments, the discipline of boxing gave him purpose, but heroin always pulled him back, dragging him further into the abyss. By the time he reached his 20s, Danny Trejo had already lived through more violence and destruction than most men would see in a lifetime. He had been stabbed, beaten, locked in solitary cells. He had stared into the eyes of death more than once. To outsiders, his path was clear. He would either die with a needle in his arm or a blade in his back. To Danny, that seemed inevitable, but fate had other plans. By the late 1990s, Danny Trejo's life had spiraled into a brutal rhythm. Drugs, crime, prison, release, repeat. He was arrested more than 10 times, each sentence longer than the last. Eventually, the California justice system stopped treating him as a juvenile and began treating him as the hardened criminal he had become. San Quentin, Folsom, Soledad, names that struck fear even in the hardest men became his world. Inside those walls, survival demanded more than courage. It demanded violence. Prisons in California during that era were battlegrounds of gangs, racial wars, and ruthless hierarchies. To walk the yard was to gamble with your life. Danny adapted quickly. His fists, sharpened by years of street fights, earned him respect. He stepped into prison boxing tournaments, fists flying, blood pumping, winning lightweight and welterweight titles in San Quentin. In a place where strength was currency, Danny was rich. But boxing was more than survival. It was discipline. For the first time, Danny discovered something that required control, timing, and focus. Between the ropes, he felt a strange sense of freedom. Yet the moment he stepped out, the needle called to him again. Heroin didn't just dull the pain, it defined his existence. The turning point came in 1990 during a Cinco de Mayo riot at Soledad prison. Chaos exploded on the yard. Guards fought to contain it. In the frenzy, Danny threw a rock-filled soda can, striking a correctional officer. In an instant, the line between survival and death vanished. Facing the possibility of capital charges, Trejo found himself in solitary confinement, staring down the prospect of the gas chamber. For the first time, death was not abstract. It was real. It was imminent. Alone in that cell, Danny Trejo broke. He prayed not the half-hearted bargaining of a desperate man, but a raw, trembling plea. He promised God that if he were spared, he would change. He would leave behind the needle, the violence, the destruction. He would live differently. Miraculously, the charges were dropped, witnesses refused to testify. The chaos of the riot clouded the evidence, and Danny walked away from death row. To him, it was divine intervention. He believed God had given him a second chance, and from that day, he vowed not to waste it. But change did not happen overnight. Prison life was still violent, still suffocating. Addiction still lingered. Yet Danny began to shift. He started attending high-step programs inside the walls, listening to other inmates talk about sobriety, about reclaiming control over their lives. For the first time, he considered that maybe he could live without drugs. He began mentoring others, sharing his story, warning them of the traps he had fallen into. He fought not just in the ring, but within himself. When he was finally released in Mukngin Chin Cham Sao Mui Chin, Danny Trejo was no longer the same man who had entered those gates. He was still scarred, still feared, still a product of violence, but he carried something new, a spark of redemption. He knew he could not go back to the streets the same way. If he did, he would die. Freedom, however, was not easy. Society had little use for ex-cons. Jobs were scarce, doors slammed shut in his face, and temptation waited around every corner. Many men in his position relapsed into crime within weeks, but Danny clung to sobriety with the same ferocity he once clung to violence. He became a counselor, helping addicts and ex-prisoners, repeating the mantra that had saved him. Everything good that has happened to me came as a result of helping someone else. It would be years before Hollywood discovered him, years of quiet work, of rebuilding his life one day at a time. He had no dream of stardom, no plan for fame. His only goal was to live and to live clean. What Danny did not know then was that the very scars that had once condemned him would soon become his greatest asset, that the face which terrified guards and gangs would one day captivate audiences worldwide, and that his journey, forged in the darkest corners of prison, was only just beginning. By the early Mukngin Chin Tram Tamuis, Danny Trejo had built a new rhythm for himself. He was no longer the man chasing the high of heroin or the chaos of street fights. Instead, he was working construction jobs, staying close to recovery groups, and dedicating his time to helping others trapped in the cycle he knew too well. For many, this would have been enough survival, sobriety, and stability. But fate had a far stranger script prepared. In Mukngin Chin Tam Tam Mui Lam, Trejo received a call that would alter his life forever. A young man he was sponsoring through a recovery program was struggling to stay clean while working as a film extra. Danny agreed to meet him on set. Not to act, not even to observe, but simply to support a kid who might otherwise fall back into addiction. The movie being filmed was Runaway Train, a gritty prison drama. When Trejo walked onto the set, everything changed. His presence was impossible to ignore. The scars, the tattoos, the aura of someone who had lived the life the film was trying to capture. Eddie Bunker, the screenwriter himself, an ex-convict, who had turned to writing, immediately recognized him. Bunker knew authenticity when he saw it. He introduced Trejo to the film's director and cast. At first, they asked him to help train actor Eric Roberts in boxing for his role. Danny agreed. After all, boxing had been his lifeline in prison, and coaching came naturally. But the director, Andrei Konchalovsky, saw more. Looking at Trejo, he asked the question that would launch a new career. "Can you act mean?" Danny laughed. Mean wasn't an act, it was second nature. The director put him in front of the camera, and just like that, Danny Trejo, the ex-convict, the recovering addict, the man society had written off, became an actor. His first appearance was small, but it was magnetic. Trejo's raw authenticity couldn't be faked. He wasn't polished, he wasn't trained, but he was real, and the camera drank it in. Almost overnight, he became Hollywood's go-to villain. Over the next few years, the offers multiplied. He played gang leaders, drug lords, henchmen, always the tough guy, always the face of danger. Films like Heat, Marked for Death, and Desperado cemented his reputation. He was typecast, yes, but Danny didn't mind. After all, typecasting paid the bills, and every role was another miracle compared to the prison cell where he could have spent the rest of his life. Audiences loved him, even as they feared him. There was something magnetic about Danny Trejo. His scars were not makeup, they were history. His glare was not a performance, it was memory. Every time he stepped into a role, he carried the weight of authenticity that no drama school could ever teach. Yet Danny never let Hollywood consume him. While he filmed alongside stars like Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Quentin Tarantino's rising circle, he remained grounded in his mission of service. Between shoots, he continued to counsel addicts, visit prisons, and tell his story. He reminded people that he wasn't an actor pretending to be a bad guy. He was a man who had lived that life and chosen to walk away from it. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very qualities that had once condemned him, his criminal record, his tattoos, his reputation as a violent man, had become the same qualities that made him a star. Hollywood had found its perfect villain in Danny Trejo, but behind the scenes, Trejo was quietly rewriting the narrative, using fame not as a drug, but as a tool to give back. By the late 1990s, Danny Trejo was no longer just another character actor. He was a cult icon. Directors knew that putting him in a film instantly gave it grit, authenticity, and a certain danger. Audiences knew his face, even if they didn't always know his name. And then, with Robert Rodriguez's Machete, Trejo finally stepped out of the shadows of supporting roles and into the spotlight as a leading man, something almost unimaginable for a scarred, typecast ex-con. But the most remarkable part of Trejo's Hollywood story is not that he became a star. It's that he never stopped being the man who prayed in that solitary cell, begging for another chance. He stayed true to sobriety, to service, to helping others. Hollywood gave him fame, but Danny Trejo gave Hollywood something more: truth. By the early 90s, Danny Trejo had become one of the most prolific actors in Hollywood. His name might not always have been at the top of the credits, but his face was unmistakable. In fact, by this point, Trejo had accumulated more film and television appearances than most leading men could ever dream of. He wasn't just that guy anymore. He was a brand of menace, a guarantee of authenticity. The villain audiences loved to hate, from Con Air to Spy Kids, from Heat to From Dusk Till Dawn. Trejo's range surprised even his biggest fans. He could terrify in one scene and charm in the next. In Robert Rodriguez's Spy Kids franchise, he played Uncle Machete, a character who was tough and intimidating, but also protective and warm-hearted. It was a role that showed children around the world another side of Trejo, planting the seed that even the scariest face could hide a heart of gold. Then, in Hai Ngin Le Mui, Trejo stepped into the role that would forever define him: Machete. What began as a fake trailer in Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez's Grindhouse exploded into a full feature film. For the first time, Danny Trejo was not just the villain in the shadows, he was the star. With his weathered face, tattooed chest, and unflinching stare, he became the ultimate anti-hero: brutal, unstoppable, larger than life. Audiences cheered, critics praised his magnetism, and Trejo, in his mid-60s, had finally become a leading man. But behind the machete-wielding legend, the real Danny Trejo was quietly building something far more important. In Hai Ngin Le Mui Moat, he opened Trejo's Tacos in Los Angeles. To outsiders, it looked like just another celebrity venture. But for Trejo, it was much more. He hired ex-convicts, recovering addicts, and people whom society had given up on, men and women who, like him, had once been told they were monsters. His restaurants became more than businesses. They became sanctuaries of second chances. The taco shops grew into a chain, followed by Trejo's Coffee and Donuts. Soon, his face, once feared, was now smiling from neon signs across Los Angeles. Families lined up to eat tacos, to take selfies with the star, to be a part of his redemption story. He had transformed not just himself, but the community around him. And still, he never stopped serving. Between film sets and restaurant launches, Trejo remained deeply involved in recovery programs. He attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings, not as a celebrity guest, but as a fellow addict, reminding people that sobriety was not a destination, but a daily fight. He visited prisons to speak with inmates, telling them with blunt honesty that he had been where they were and that their lives didn't have to end in chains. What made Danny Trejo unique was the paradox he embodied. On screen, he was Hollywood's eternal villain, a face of violence. Off-screen, he was a force of compassion, a man who dedicated his life to helping others escape the same cycle he had barely survived. Fans often remarked on the shock of meeting him in person. They expected menace. Instead, they were met with warmth, humility, and humor. In Hai Ngin Le Mui Chin, his real-life heroism became front-page news. Trejo witnessed a car crash in Los Angeles, where an SUV had flipped with a child trapped inside. Without hesitation, he ran to the wreckage, crawled inside, and pulled the boy to safety. The world applauded, headlines proclaimed him a hero, but Trejo shrugged it off, saying simply, "I just did what I hope anyone would do." For Danny Trejo, fame was never the endgame. It was a tool, a platform to tell his story, to spread the message that no one is born a monster, and that redemption is always possible. The more Hollywood cast him as the bad guy, the more he leaned into being the good guy in real life. His life became a living contradiction and a powerful lesson. Because Danny Trejo had discovered something many stars never learn: true legacy isn't built in front of cameras. It's built in the lives you touch when the cameras aren't rolling. By the time Danny Trejo reached his 70s, he had become more than a Hollywood fixture. He was a living symbol of transformation, an unlikely star who had turned a life of violence into a life of purpose. Yet Trejo himself was the first to admit that redemption did not erase pain. Sobriety didn't make the scars disappear. It simply gave him the strength to live with them. In Haingin Lair Haimumot, he released his memoir, Trejo, My Life of Crime, Redemption, and Hollywood. It was a raw, unflinching portrait of the man behind the machete. He laid bare not only his years of addiction and prison, but also the struggles that haunted him even in success: broken marriages, strained family ties, and the constant work of staying sober. For readers, it was a revelation. For Trejo, it was simply the truth. "I've been married 4 times, he confessed in interviews, "and divorced 4 times. I've hurt people I loved. I wasn't always a good husband or a good father, but I keep trying. Every day, I keep trying." These words revealed the paradox of Danny Trejo's life. He had conquered demons that killed countless others, yet he remained painfully human, flawed, vulnerable. Fame had not made him immune to heartbreak. Success had not guaranteed happiness. But what set him apart was his refusal to hide it. Trejo never pretended to be more than what he was: a survivor, still learning, still healing. Even as Hollywood embraced him, Trejo never forgot the boy who first picked up a needle at 12, the teenager who thought crime was the only way to live, the prisoner who prayed in solitary confinement for a second chance. He carried those memories not as shame but as lessons. He used them to reach others, the addicts, the prisoners, the forgotten, with a message that was brutally simple: if I can change, so can you. And people listened. They listened because his scars were real, because his story was not fiction. When Trejo walked into a recovery meeting or a prison, he didn't arrive as a celebrity. He arrived as proof that survival was possible, proof that redemption was real. But Trejo also understood that redemption was not a one-time event. It was a daily choice. For decades, he remained active in Narcotics Anonymous, attending meetings, sponsoring newcomers, reminding himself that no matter how far he had come, the abyss was always near. He lived by a mantra: everything good that has happened to me is a direct result of helping someone else. This philosophy shaped every part of his life. It guided his acting, his businesses, his community work. It was why he stopped for every fan photo, why he hired people with criminal records, why he showed up to speak to kids in schools. Trejo knew that fame was fleeting, but service endured, and yet the scars lingered. In candid moments, he admitted to loneliness, to regrets that fame could never erase. "I've buried a lot of friends," he once said. "People I loved, people who didn't make it out like I did." Survivor's guilt haunted him. The question of why he had been spared when so many others weren't. The boy trapped in a cycle of violence, the addict nodding out in alleys, the inmate staring at death row. All those versions of himself could have been permanent. Somehow, they weren't. That haunting question became part of his mission. If he had been spared, it had to be for a reason, and that reason was to spend the rest of his life lifting others. As the years passed, Danny Trejo became more than an actor. He became a mentor, a community leader, a walking contradiction, the villain who saved lives, the scarred face that gave people hope. His story blurred the line between performance and reality. On screen, he was the bad guy. Off screen, he was the reminder that bad guys don't have to stay bad forever. Trejo's honesty about his struggles gave his legacy depth. He didn't want to be remembered as perfect. He wanted to be remembered as real, as someone who had fallen deeper than most and still managed to climb out. And in that honesty lies the essence of his story. Redemption is not about erasing scars. It's about learning to live with them and to use them to light the way for others still trapped in the dark. When audiences see Danny Trejo on screen, they still see the villain, The scarred face, the menacing glare, the man who looks as though he's lived through 1,000 fights and won most of them. And in a way, that perception is correct. He has lived that life. But what makes Trejo unforgettable isn't the villainy he portrays. It's the humanity that lies beneath it. His career has spanned more than 4 decades, with over 400 acting credits, making him one of the hardest-working actors in Hollywood history. He has shared the screen with legends, headlined cult franchises, and become a household name in both gritty action and family-friendly roles. But Trejo himself will tell you that none of it matters compared to the work he does off-screen. Sponsoring addicts, visiting prisons, feeding communities, giving hope where hope has long died. The irony of his life is striking. The very face that once condemned him, marked by scars and tattoos, forever tied to crime, became his salvation. Hollywood saw in him the perfect bad guy. What they didn't see, at least not at first, was the man who had already lived and survived everything those characters represented. And yet, that is why his story resonates so deeply. Trejo is living proof that redemption isn't reserved for saints or the lucky few. It's messy, it's painful, it's imperfect, but it's possible. He has shown that no one is beyond saving, that the monsters we fear are often just broken people in need of a second chance. The unanswered question his life leaves us with is simple but haunting. If Danny Trejo could change, how many others could too if only they were given the opportunity? How many kids, lost at 12 years old, could be rescued before they pick up the needle? How many prisoners could walk out and build new lives if society believed in them instead of discarding them? Danny Trejo's legacy is not that he was the villain who became famous. His legacy is that he turned that villain into a vessel for something greater, a message of hope, a testimony that scars can become symbols of survival. He didn't erase his past. He carried it into every film, every speech, every meeting. And in doing so, he reminded the world of a truth we often forget. People are not defined by their worst mistakes. In the end, Trejo himself put it best. I wasn't born a monster. I became one, but I didn't stay that way. Those words are his epitaph in waiting, the sentence that captures everything he fought for. Because Danny Trejo's story isn't just about Hollywood. It's about redemption. And redemption, as his life proves, is the greatest role anyone can play.